The way that we will run this session today is that we will have some high-level opening remarks followed by a panel discussion, and we will also leave time at the end for a question and answer session. We do need to finish promptly at 4:30, as I understand there is another event in this room straight afterwards. So, without further ado, we might move on to our first segment, and I would like to introduce Mr. Daniele Violetti, who is the Senior Director and Program Coordination of the UNFCCC Secretariat. So over to you, Daniele. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Good afternoon to all of you for joining today us at this special event on the needs-based finance project. My warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Climate Change Secretariat for this important discussion. I think you all know the origin of this project. It goes back to the COP23 here in Bonn, actually, when the COP gave the mandate to the Secretariat to assist developing countries in assessing their climate finance, technology and capacity building needs, and translate them into action. And that's a very important aspect of that now, because in fact COP26 in Glasgow reiterated its decision and requested the Secretariat to continue to do this work. And it's even more important now that after the outcome of COP26 in Glasgow, we are moving fully into the implementation phase of the Paris Agreement, that we are looking now at concrete action that can be taken in support of developing countries in implementing their needs and priorities. So the progress of this NBF project has been quite remarkable, has grown over time, and I'm very happy to say that now we have 12 regional activities ongoing, encompassing more than 120 developing countries in all regions, Asia, Africa, Latin America, the islands in the Pacific, Caribbean and Indian Ocean. So has really picked up and has put a lot of, let's say, effort on the side of the Secretariat in delivering this to see some concrete action that we can also support within our capacity. So you will hear much more on how the project works and how this is taking care of the needs identified. But I think two important elements I want to highlight. One is that it's country or regional driven. So we really have this opportunity to listen and discuss with the developing countries themselves on the basis of their identified needs. And then see how, from what they have outlined in their NDCs, this can be translated into projects that can have access to financing. It's always important that it's not only building up from bottom up, from the country level, but also it receives the high-level political support in those countries and in regions in order that those prioritization that have been done as the support at all levels in order then to be followed up and implementing them. We are also having a very nice experience recently. In a workshop we organized in the Maldives, we had the opportunity to see the GCF and Adaptation Fund Secretariat working together in support of the Indian Ocean island states in looking at how we can support the implementation of these priorities identified. So this is really something that is happening, and we have received so much positive feedback that we are really looking forward to continue to do this in other regions. So, well, as I said, you will hear much more of this in details and how it works. But on the Secretariat side, we are really fully committed to implement this COP decision, a request to the Secretariat, and we are looking forward also to enhance our support, provided that, of course, we have the resources to do that. But it is definitely a priority for us in the area of climate finance, but goes beyond that to capacity building as well in other areas. So, Fiona, thanks again for the introduction, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Daniele. And now I would like to invite our second opening speaker, Mr. David Kaluba. He is the Project Climate Adaptation Expert in the Ministry of Fisheries and Livestock for the Republic of Zambia, and he is also here in his capacity representing the chairmanship of the African Group of Negotiators. So over to you, David.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for for the invitation, and it's an honor for me to be here to represent the chair. He's obviously busy with the ongoing SBI opening session. He couldn't come in his personal capacity. But I think we have spent significant time in talking about the needs for financing adaptation, mitigation. We have established institutions to deliver the financing that we need. The GCF, the Adaptation Fund, the processes to try and strengthen the flow of resources in those institutions are ongoing. We continue reviewing the work of all these mechanisms that we have put in place, and of course we do face challenges in terms of accessing. Part of that comes through the complex accreditation procedures. Sometimes I say in sitting down to make an application for accreditation is like registering for a PhD qualification. But those are processes which we have put in place, and we set the requirements for us to access those funds in that way. We are working towards having them simplified in the best way possible to make it easy to access the funds. So all those are still ongoing. But the challenge still remains is actually to put that action in place that will facilitate the flow of funds towards a project, towards for the community or for certain investments to happen. And I think this is where the needs-based finance comes in. It's that facilitation, that support that is needed for many of our countries in Africa. I was having a chat with my colleague, I don't know if Fred Onduli is here, and we were actually debating on the possibility to invite certain partners to do the actual hands-on training for project developers. And there's always a demand for bankable proposals. And for many in our countries, what is this animal called bankable proposal? What kind of shape does it come in, does it take? But then those capacity enhancements, for us to be able to produce those bankable proposals have become increasingly important for our areas. It's resource mobilization institutions such as ministries of finance to have those skills. It is about us as negotiators who are in the ministries of environment or ministries of climate change to now have the hands-on skills to be able to put information together which is acceptable to the GCF, acceptable to the Adaptation Fund. It is now us to sit down and begin to look at the requirements of accreditation, because that is the driver or the tool for us to access the funds, to be able to understand exactly what is required and the time and the capacity and the ability to be able to put together information for accreditation. That requires a skill, it requires experience, it requires ownership, it requires ability for us to drive these initiatives. And so, speaking from the African group of negotiators, these are the practical aspects that we would like to see, to move from ambition and from the broad, policy framework to actual implementation. And this is what is going to drive the acceleration of implementation of NDCs, of the NAPs, of the various programs that most of our countries have. So I think with that, I thank you so much for the invitation, and we look forward to seeing the support from the Secretariat in getting these tools actually in the hands of people that can facilitate the flow of meeting our needs in adaptation and mitigation, capacity building, and many other areas. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And can you join with me in thanking both our opening speakers, David and Daniel? Thank you. So we will now move to our panel discussion, and I would like to invite our panel members to join me up here on stage. And while they are doing that, I might just introduce them all to save a bit of time. Thank you so much. So, yes, please, come and join me on stage. So from representing the Arab states, we have Mr. Hamed Al-Jamil, who's the lead climate finance negotiator for the Ministry of Energy in Saudi Arabia. Representing Africa, we have Mr. Michael Okumu, who's the Deputy Director and Climate Change Negotiations and Finance, the Climate Change Directorate of Kenya. We also have Mr. Usman Fall Sall, the Coordinator for the West African Alliance on Carbon Market and Climate Finance in Senegal. Representing Asia, we have Mr. Albert Mangalang, who's the Head of Climate Change Office in the Philippines. Representing island states, we have Eileen Niaz, who is the Director of the Ministry of Environment, Climate Change and Technology of the Maldives, and Mr. Mikhail Robertson, who's the Legal Advisor for Antigua and Barbuda. So thank you very much to all our panel members and for your time today and in joining this discussion. This is a really nice opportunity now to listen to the experience of the needs-based finance projects from country and regional leaders that we have up here today in identifying climate finance needs, assessing flows and developing strategic approaches to strengthen climate finance mobilisation, access and capacities. So what we might do is we might just move from right to left. So we'll start with you, Ahmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. And thank you so much all here for attending this very important event on the needs-based finance. Thank you for this opportunity to share with you the experience of the Arab region with regards to the MBF project. This region comprised of 22 member states, and it's considered one of the most vulnerable region when it comes to the impacts of climate change, including but not limited to droughts, sandstorms, water resources, scarcity and management, etc. When it comes to the really developing a strategy for climate finance, it is the first of its kind in our region. With the aim of enhance the mobilization of climate finance to address the needs and priorities for this region. And I think similar to other regions, we have undertaken technical assessment on climate finance for our region. It's on the website of UNFCCC. It's already published, accessible. I encourage you all to have a look into this assessment. Well, from the assessment, it's really clear now to note that, and it's already been also, we are very much aware of that this region has two main very important issues when it comes to climate finance. Issue number one is the gap we have between the finance mobilized and delivered. The second point is the imbalance allocation and focus, I would say, when it comes to the mitigation and adaptation projects, given that, and according to the technical assessment as well, that the main priority for the Arab region is adaptation. Currently, it's clear that the resources also provided to the Arab regions need to be based on the needs and priorities of the regions, and this could be including but not limited to the agriculture for food security, water management and desalination for a region that really have water scarcity, and most of the region there are depending on water desalination, high energy intensive processes, and the coastal zone management, sustainable use of cooling system in a region that is considered one of the hottest region in the world. So we need to come up with innovative solutions for sustainable cooling system. Energy efficiency as well is considered one of the very important sector to be financed by climate finance. After assessing the flows of the current climate finance flows, and also according to the technical assessments, the financial flows are basically centered in the main areas that I have already mentioned. However, when it comes to the volumes, still we are behind. Only 18% of the financial flows targets adaptation, given that the adaptation, as I said, and as reported by so many multilateral development banks and international organizations, including technical assessment done by the Secretariat and the strategic partners, that adaptation is the main priority. However, it received only 18%, while 77% goes to the mitigation efforts. Also, we noticed there is kind of unbalanced geographical distributions where most of the financial flows goes to 4 to 5 countries within the region, with relatively very low flows going to LDCs. Also, one very important and critical point when it comes to this region, our region, is that there is insufficient grant-based financial instruments when it comes to a region that is already indebted region. We need to find very innovative financial instrument, grant-based or concessional support, etc. Now, given that the main issues when it comes to climate finance and the tracking progress of the financial flows within regions are really clearly identified from the technical assessment as well as the other partners. The next step, ideally, would be the implementation of those kind of priorities when it comes to climate finance. Priorities of adaptation and mitigation co-benefits, etc., etc., in a manner that is really towards the context of sustainable development. It's very important for all member states in our region. So the next step after assessing the needs, we would be really make sure that all the development partners that we are working on, I can name ESCWA, for example, or Arab League, for example, multilateral or bilateral development banks and financial institutions. They need to provide the financial climate finance, and they need to direct those kind of resources towards the needs and priorities of the region, and we will make sure that those priorities are really at the core business of all the organization working in the region. Being as a chair of the Arab group. this is really in general and how we see this matter, and also with regards to the next steps, would also somehow preview on the plan that we have. We tentatively have the plan to convey a validation strategy, hopefully in August, in 2 months' time. Along with we will be considering holding training workshops in one of our member country in the region. Those kind of training workshops and capacity building are meant to focus on climate finance related topics, and hopefully we'll be finalizing this soon as well. We hope also the draft strategy we have, based on the technical assessment we've done, that will get endorsed in early October by higher level engagement at a ministerial meeting. But also thinking really at a higher level, we are really aiming to have to promote and catalyze the collective action, sub-regional and regional level among Arab states, but also link the Arab region with the efforts being undertaken climate finance in regions and in other regions and around the world. This is really very important when it comes to our region, and we think with the collaboration with our colleagues, whether it's South-South collaboration or North-South, that would be really helpful in terms of conducting workshops, dialogues, having this kind of open area where we can exchange ideas, innovative ideas, tools, and a roadmap in terms of finding a roadmap and how we can support the most vulnerable communities and countries, especially in our, as I said, in our region. With that, I think, thank you so much for listening. Very optimistic to have really fruitful discussion, and very optimistic to see these results of the strategy to be implemented soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Ahmed, and thank you also for sticking to time. Next, we'll go to Michael, and I encourage the rest of our panel members to also stick to about 8 to 9 minutes so that we have time for a Q&A afterwards. So thank you. Over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Fiona. And may I just say that it's like Ahmed has basically said what I wanted to say is like our regions are quite similar, very similar problems, and maybe also very similar approaches from the look of things. So now I'm just going to give a small update on the East African community perspective. And for those in the room who may not know, the East Africa communities those countries, let me say, along the African equator, if I may call it. That is Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and recently we also got in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo. So basically, it's from the Indian Ocean to the Pacific. So it's quite a big community, and it is a community that also experiences a lot of climate change challenges, serious droughts, serious floods, sometimes droughts and floods coming back to back and preceding each other. So it's before you recover from a very serious drought, there is a very serious flood somewhere. Before the floods go away, they go away totally, and then there is another drought. So it has been a very interesting or challenging scenario where countries have not been having time to breathe and to think seriously about other development needs, in the sense that climate change basically shifts our focus from our normal development needs to addressing climate-related emergency. Since honestly, it will be impossible to build a school when people are dying of hunger somewhere, or to build a road when there is need for some people to be rescued from a flood, and so on and so forth. So climate change has seriously impacted our region. Now, regarding this, the need-based financing project, we in the region came up, of course, under the support of the RCC Kampala and other partners. We were able to come together as member states, experts in those states, to develop a strategy, the climate finance mobilization, resource mobilization strategy to enable the states to address or to respond to these climate-related emergencies that continually affect the region. Now, an assessment was done in the region, and just to know the need, the financing needs of the partner states. And in that particular assessment, we found that the region, if we look at from the NDC perspective, the combined needs was going to 212 US billion for the next 10 years to address the climate change needs in the region, and that is excluding the new entrant into the block, that is the DRC, and which kind of boils down to something close to 21 billion per year for the next 10 years. And most of this, incidentally, goes to mitigation needs. And as I've outlined earlier, it is our greatest need is adaptation, because we like have to stop and do nothing but addressing climate emergencies. So we are been so much boxed into well, the supply of resources has majorly been mitigation, but the real need is in the adaptation side of the climate space. Now, between the year 2013 and 2018, it is estimated that around 2.5 billion flowed in terms of climate finance in the region, and that just shows the disparity between the needs and the available resources. Yet, of course, from discussions, you will always hear as if there's a lot of resources flowing, but when you go down now to look exactly, compare notes, you find that there isn't really much. We really need much more on the ground. Now, as a result, we came up with a climate mobilization, climate finance mobilization strategy for the region, and this strategy has went through the technical process, in that countries also had their internal processes of looking at it, whether it really responds to their country needs. Then after that, the experts from all the countries came together and looked at the document and agreed on how the details of it. Unfortunately, it took a fairly longer period than thought, specifically due to the challenges of COVID. We started well, but COVID kind of stopped the momentum, and in the process, we ended up finalizing the strategy about 2 months ago, and it has been approved by the Ministerial Council the EAC Ministerial Council, and it is pending the final approval from the council. So this particular strategy has various thematic areas, and from the strategy we also came up with what we call pipeline projects, which we are still working on, not yet finalized, but pipeline projects to try to address the real issues now on the ground, translating the strategy now to real action on the ground. And among the areas are capacity building of the region, so that to enable experts to access and attract more finance. So that is developing of proposals and coming up with instruments to attract funding, projects to address needs of small-scale farmers in the region, because farming is a major source of livelihoods within the region. Thematic areas to do, pipeline projects to do with early warning issues, because there is a lot of need for early warning to enable quick response to the various challenges in the region, as well as also an area of attracting private sector to engage in climate action. So we have had various pipeline projects that we are still developing, and also probably looking for finance for it to be, or for them to be funded to be able to respond to the needs of the EAC. Maybe I could say far much more, but I don't want to consume all the time for the sake of my friends. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. We'll move right along. Helene, would you like to go next? Thank you.
Thank you. I prepared some slides, so if we can see them. I apologize for the delay. No problem. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Fiona, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to talk about the needs-based finance project for the island states of the Indian Ocean. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, the project is supported by the UNFCCC Secretariat for the 6 island states of the Indian Ocean, which are Comoros, Madagascar, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Sri Lanka, which we are collectively referring to as the EASO states for this project. The objectives of the project include increasing action and capacity for adaptation and mitigation in the region, building capacity for climate finance access, and also to empower the region to place us at the forefront of climate finance mobilization and access. Next slide, please. Yeah, some highlights of the project activities implemented so far include a technical workshop we held in Maldives in 2020. We have also prepared and validated the EASO climate finance mobilization and access strategy and its technical annexes. And like Danielle mentioned in the opening session, we had a very successful training workshop in climate finance mobilization and access just 2 weeks ago in the Maldives, where we had the presence of all the EZO states as well as all of the operating entities of the financial mechanism, the GEF, the GCF, and the Adaptation Fund, who were there throughout the process, throughout all 4 days of the workshop, advising us for the duration of the event. Next slide, please. Looking at the main findings of the assessments, the region collectively received a total of $6 billion in climate finance during the past 3 decades, but more than half of these were loans, mainly to Mauritius and Sri Lanka. Next slide, please. Looking at the distribution across the region, Sri Lanka and Madagascar received the majority of support at 55% and 21% respectively, while Seychelles received the lowest at 3%, with Comoros at 4% and Maldives at 5%. Next slide, please. With respect to the priority needs of the countries, the priority areas identified under mitigation were energy, waste, forestry, land use, agriculture, and industry. And on the table, you can see where the tick boxes where the countries have identified the respective areas as their priorities. Next slide, please. Under adaptation, the areas include water and sanitation, health and food security, amongst others, as the priority needs identified as common areas across the EZO states. Next slide, please. Under capacity building, the identified areas include needs on data, monitoring and research, access to finance, private sector engagement, transparency, governance and regulation, and several other areas as well. Next slide, please. So while the climate finance needs of the region has not been comprehensively quantified, based on the available data, about $50 billion has been quantified as needs. This includes $33 billion for adaptation, and $10 billion for mitigation, and $7 billion as technology and capacity building needs. Next. Before I move on to this slide, I also want to compare this 50 billion in needs as compared to how much is received in the past 3 decades, which was a total of 6 billion. So there's clearly a very big gap in the needs versus what we have been able to mobilize so far. So on the climate finance mobilization and access strategy for the island states of the Indian Ocean 2020 to 2025, which was developed under the project, 6 strategic areas for regional collaboration were identified. These include scaling up climate finance for adaptation, finding partners and sources of finance, capacity building and awareness raising, development of enabling policies, making the institutional arrangements, as well as MRV and transparency arrangements. Next slide, please. On the way forward, the next steps we have planned are, firstly, to obtain high-level political endorsement for the strategy from all of the EZO states. And we also intend to present the strategy to prospective financiers and development partners through convening an investor forum in the Maldives sometime soon. We are also planning to develop regional projects for the EZO states to work together in areas, common priority areas for us, which some work was already done in the training workshop held 2 weeks ago in Maldives, where we were able to come up with, I think, 5 priority areas and some sort of concepts that that we could take forward as the next steps. We also intend to undertake outreach activities on the strategy. So that is basically a very quick summary of the Indian Ocean project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those experiences. And the next we have Albert. Over to you.
Thank you, Fiona. Anyway, pleasant afternoon to all of you. So it's my pleasure to represent some of the member states and, of the ASEAN. And I would like to share with you the updates on the need-based finance project that's being implemented by the ASEAN member states. The countries are actually Brunei, Cambodia, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Myanmar, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. So maybe we should skip that slide because Danielle has already mentioned this. I mean, the history about the nature, the needs-based finance project, and I would like to focus on the initiative by the member states as regards to the support being provided by the project as initiated by the UNFCCC Secretariat with the help of the RCC. And of course, supporting us also is the ASEAN members, ASEAN Secretariat. So basically, the project would support implementation of the climate finance program of the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change Action Plan, which mandates also the member states to work together, I mean, cooperate with the UNFCCC Secretariat in implementing the project. So just like the other colleagues have mentioned a while ago, as developing countries, like the ASEAN member states would always be like to have the access and also work on to mobilize climate finance, which is also a priority by most countries. So as this has already been also required by a kind of support that required by the NDC implementation, and also this would involve a range of climate change adaptation and mitigation objectives. I'm going to show you later the numbers. I mean the numbers and dollars as that is being required in implementing these different measures. So current finance flows into the region are estimated to be between 3.2 US dollars and 6 billion a year. Anyway, the goal actually is of this of the project is to have the technical assistance in a technical assessment in on the financial requirement by the ASEAN member states. So under the NBF project, we have the ASEAN Climate Finance Mobilization and Access Strategy, which is has been formulated in order to inform or to be informed by the outcomes of the technical assistance, technical assessment of climate finance in Southeast Asia, which is also a study developed by the ASEAN member states. So the goal of the ASEAN Climate Finance Mobilization and Access Strategy is to ensure that climate finance can be effectively accessed, mobilized, and scaled up to contribute to achieve the climate goals of the ASEAN member states. On the next slide, we have the various priority areas identified in the technical assessment development. First and foremost is to have the support developed for preparing project in the pipeline. Like this will involve capacity building to support pipeline development and also the actual pipeline development. And on the diversification and innovation, which is the second priority area, would involve the development of innovative blended finance instruments and mobilization of private sector finance and alternative financing. The third area, which will focus on facilitating access to climate finance, would also involve the inclusive access to international public funding. Cohesion and harmonization of policy is also one of the areas. This is being planned of having an harmonized kind of initiatives related to climate finance in the ASEAN region. Capacity building and enabling environment would involve trainings and technical assistance that would also address barriers through enabling policies and strategies. And lastly, on transparency and integrity, this would aim to strengthen current practices across the region in MRV as well as in M&E systems. Developing of consistent systems for NDC implementation is also included, and also initiatives to develop voluntary, consistent environment-related financial risk disclosures for use by financial institutions. And on the next slide, we would like to provide responses to the questions that have been given to us. Like, for example, the challenges that we have faced in mobilizing and accessing climate finance based on the responses by the ASEAN member states. Basically, as an observation or as been reported by the member states, many financial and monetary instruments are available and in use for sourcing and delivering climate finance. But due to the dominance of bank financing in the ASEAN region, their wide use is limited. And also, most micro enterprises, small and medium enterprises as well, would face poor access to climate finance in the region's bank-dominant system. So further support for bank loan, perhaps bank loans for financing MSMEs projects is also needed. And on the next slide, as regards to the finance needs of developing countries for achieving their climate adaptation and mitigation goals, in the ASEAN, we, based on the national reports that we have gathered from the 10 member states, the estimated needs would amount to 422 billion up to the year 2030 for most sectors, and most of the needs expressed are for mitigation, amounting to $293.01 billion US dollars, and the remainder is for adaptation, which would amount to 129.15 billion. So the finance needed for the region would be between 40 to 80 billion per year over the next 10 years. And in the next slide, this would give us the needed terms in building capacity for accessing and mobilizing more climate finance. So based on the technical assessment, the capacity building needs are as follows, but not limited to enhancing planning capacity and sound proposal development skills. Also, the conduct of training for cities and highly urbanized centers so that they become more proactive in climate action, the provision of advice to decision makers and in support to the communication of cross-sectoral coordination committees of ministries of finance, and lastly, to develop the technical advisory service on financial instruments, and last, the conduct of training course or module on green banking. On the next slide, we would like to present this, the terms of create, and how do we envision the terms of creating an enabling environment for climate finance, mobilization, and access. So this would, the technical assessment report has given us has shown us that the enabling environment related actions are necessary, and but not limited to the following. Like we have to increase cross-border flow investments among member states from developed markets in ASEAN corporate bonds, and also there's a need to strengthen M&E procedures and overall financial governance and financial institutions through development of green banking law, and of course we need to receive technical assistance for developing a national sustainable and green financing roadmap, and also to have an access to the assistance for harmonizing standards. And lastly, the question on how will the needs-based finance project could help us in addressing challenges. So we are hopeful that the needs-based project or needs-based finance project would provide an evidence-based framework for enabling countries to mobilize climate finance at scale in a country-driven manner. So it is also, it would also open opportunities for regional collaboration on climate finance as being already, as being, as observed already among the ASEAN member states. That's all, colleagues. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Albert, for sharing those experiences and priorities of the ASEAN states. Next, we have Usman. Over to you.
Thank you, Fiona, for giving me the floor and the opportunity to share our experience in West Africa. Now we are back to Africa. First of all, I would like to thank the Secretariat for assisting our sub-region in this process of need-based finance. ECOWAS is the economic community of West African states. We have 15 countries belonging to this community, and we have the chance to go through this process in West Africa. And the West African Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance I'm coordinating was part of the team who was facilitating this process with the Commission. As you may know, climate change is really impacting the livelihood of all ECOWAS members, and predictable climate finance at scale is needed to adapt to climate change, but also to play a part, even if it's a small part, in climate mitigation. In West Africa, the process has been coordinated, as I mentioned earlier, by the Commission in partnership with our alliance and the Secretariat, the RCC, Lome, and some experts in the region. And country needs and climate finance flow has been assessed, and a draft climate finance access and mobilization strategy has been formulated along with the consideration of regional projects, programs, initiatives, and facilities, and also an implementation plan have been already elaborated. On the basis of several works that have been undertaken in the sub-region, we come up to see that the sub-region required 294 billion until 2030. And a good portion of this financing is needed for transboundary and regional relevant issues. So far, between 2013 and 2018, the region has only received an average of 4.9 billion per year on international public climate finance. So that you see that there is a big challenge in terms of fund mobilization in our sub-region. The strategy that we have managed to develop set out a strategic framework across 5 strategic areas and key action to address common barriers that we are facing and provide solutions to scale up climate finance in the region. The first is to put in place an enhanced enabling environment for mobilizing funding and catalyzing private investment. The second one is to enhance technical capacity for developing and implementing mitigation and adaptation projects, and also enhancing institutional capacity and mechanism at the national and regional level for the coordination of climate finance mobilization in our sub-region. We also work on identifying and mobilizing effective, innovative, and appropriate financing for priority climate action. And we also focus on strengthening and developing MRV for climate finance. So to date, technical expert of the Commission in West Africa recommended the adoption of the draft need-based finance that we have already elaborated, and a workshop has been organized in Accra in Ghana on April 26 and April 27, and this document has been adopted by the technical expert. And the ECOWAS Council level, the technical committee of the ECOWAS Council level also approved the document on April 29, and it has been now forwarded to at the political level, and we expect that by end of June, this document will be adopted at the highest level. And the implementation of the strategy by ECOWAS and West African Alliance with the support of the development partner can begin after this, and we count on the support of all donors and partners to implement this strategy. So in a nutshell, this is what we have done so far in West Africa, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Usman. And last but certainly not least, we have Mikai. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Fiona, and good day to colleagues. Great. Okay, thank you. So, just, I guess, excuse me, we closed out this project quite some time ago, actually, 2 or 3 years ago. But I'll just be going through the main outcomes of this needs-based finance project. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Right. So just an overview of what exactly I'll be presenting on. So first of all, I'll touch on the importance of this project. I think it's key to get that out front, especially in line with what the mandate was for the needs-based finance project. And then I'll kind of divulge into the focus of the project when it looks at things like the methodology in which, for sure, that we unpacked what we believe nationally is climate finance is defined as. Then we went into an overview of our national and international flows. We had a really good interaction with understanding the private sector and how it interacts with climate change, or the lack thereof, that we found. And then another crucial element was Article 21C and working with our Ministry of Finance and trying to unpack some of the tools that can be used for us to sort of not only measure our progress, but first of all, create that enabling environment that's needed to achieve it. So next slide, thanks. Right, so quickly just noting and looking at what the needs-based finance project is focused on. From what we understood, it was facilitating access and the mobilization of climate finance. And as highlighted here, what was really critical for us is that it gave us the opportunity to basically provide the evidence and look at issues of access and equity. So it's quite interesting. And as you look at the data and unpack where exactly we try to mobilize finance, the trends are quite clear that there are certain inequities. So we'll look at that in the numbers. I'll just give you a quick forecast. And then as well, the ETF, extremely important. We did this before we actually finalized the ETF tables and what have you. And I know many negotiator colleagues on the floor would have heard me mention this assessment. And it was one of the first times, at least I would interact with, especially on the other side, who have been constantly, developed countries who have been reporting on the support provided and mobilized. This was our turn to kind of unpack that a bit. And just to note and take a pause quickly here that I'd like to make mention to the other lead authors of this project, Dr. Charlene Watson, who I'm sure many SCF members are aware of, Courtney Bailey, who now works at WRI, who used to work at the DOE, but she's from St. Vincent and the Grenadines in the Caribbean, and then Amira Ramdin, as well as myself, who compiled and did this mini BA, for lack of a better term. And I must say that the driving force behind is behind one of your colleagues, Ambassador Diane Blacklane, who's a SCF member. So I'll just highlight again that it was really crucial for us to get this done in order for us to have a clear understanding of how we're going to go about filling in that support needed and received table under our biennial transparency report and developing those methodologies ahead of time, as well as feeding into the global stock take collectively. So next slide, please. All right, so other important things to look at as well is you can clearly see coming out as well in the trends is that we are clearly committed as Antigua and Barbuda to attaining climate finance. And I guess we'll unpack it a bit more at, I guess, the resources that our government had to basically try to expend and make sure that we got to get the small amount of climate finance. And it took a lot of effort. So just wanted to highlight that this product and this report is to show basically a collection of all of those efforts and a commitment to that. But a commitment that sadly is based on necessity because of being marginalized. And we'll unpack it a bit more as it relates to eligibility. The last thing is a springboard. So you would note there that I make mention to our readiness projects. So we actually used our 4th readiness and 5th readiness projects based on this needs-based finance report to continue to develop and enhance on those methodologies that we have for tracking climate finance, not only for our domestic spending as it relates to budget spend, but as well looking at how we track the finance that we get from the international community and looking at it from the recipient perspective as opposed to the support provider perspective. So just to highlight that it really did provide us with that good foundation. So let's quickly go on to the next slide, where we can kind of a bit unpack our national finance flows, and I'll just kind of read you some excerpts on it. So you can see the trends, and maybe to ask a question in general to the crowd, can anyone, I guess, speculate why 2017 may have had such a big spend? If anyone would want to garner a guess? No? So Hurricane Irma happened in 2017. Yeah. So it's quite interesting, and this is our spend. This is from our public sector budget, and you see the spend completely shoot up, and even when you're looking at, I guess, a comparison between the capital expenditure, which is your infrastructure, right? That's really and truly that's in the darker blue. You see that just completely shoot up, and it's not. You could say correlation or coincidence, but it's I think personally it's quite telling. So when we do talk about loss and damage finance and rebuilding and rehabilitating and the stress that it has on our national budgets, you can kind of see it play out through this 4-year period. And hopefully, as we continue this exercise, we can continue to show these trends in more detail, with more authority, with more historical data as time goes along. So just to highlight as well that on department and program basis, so the most climate-related budget spending occurred with our Central Board of Health. And just to give you an idea and a picture, the reason why that is that we found a lot of the spending for cleanup. The responsibility of that relies with our Central Board of Health to clean up post extreme weather event, pre and post. And I think also many persons don't appreciate that even if you do have to prepare for a hurricane, normally if it doesn't come, you still have to spend. So it's like we call it panic spending, panic buying, and this happens every time that even a hurricane warning, hurricane watch kind of comes. So a lot of the adaptation related spending. So that's actually Central Board of Health was 45%. And then followed by it, if anyone can guess, it was our works ministry. So that dealt with our public infrastructure. So that's rebuilding roads, trying to make them resilient, critical infrastructure. And so that was 37%. And both of them were 100% related to adaptation based on the methodologies that we used for tagging. The next, looking at the Department of Agriculture, that was 45% as well. The Department of Environment was actually 23% because not all our time is spent on climate change. As you can imagine, we focus on other different areas. And then the Met Office was 14% of that, so of the total spending, and had the highest amount of mitigation-related expenditure. Just as well, looking at analyzing, though, however, climate-related expenditure relevant to the total budget of the department, the total department spending, our National Office of Disaster Services had the highest relative spend rate. So what that was that they spent over 66% of their budget being climate relevant. Noting that they have a mandate for all of the disasters, both national, both climate-related and non-climate-related disasters. The DOE, as I stated before, our main focus is not always climate change, so actually 50% of our spend is on climate, but that's quite a bit. And then the next is Central Board of Health. As it relates to its total budget spending, it was actually 40% of its budget was climate relevant. So I'll go on to the next slide quickly. Right, so this is the breakdown of the response type from the national spend. So when you look at it as well, you look at the mitigation aspect, it is a smaller spend, and it just correlates with the type of state that we are, which is a small and developing state. Our focus is on building resilience. So just to give you another perspective on those numbers and figures. So next to I think it's international. Right. So our international spend. This is where I want to unpack the equity bit. So we're now a high income country using the skewed metric of GDP per capita. And so this limits our access to concessional financing, essentially. So, and as you can imagine, a lot of the concessional financing is actually programmed through bilateral, which is our smallest amount, and I think it's 7% in the corner right there. And so looking at that and kind of analyzing those figures as well, it's quite interesting to see what necessity has kind of placed you into and your focus on where you want to seek and try and mobilize climate finance from. So a lot of our programming is through us as a accredited entity to both the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund, which is most of where the portfolio of funding comes from. So again, the government and through the leadership that we've had over the past 8 years, we've pushed for accreditation, which is extremely expensive, extremely time-consuming, and you lose a lot of your life just dealing with all of that process, and I can attest to that. But what else can we do, right? We are not eligible for what is considered as other types of finance, and I think, and hopefully, I hope this conveys the importance of why we keep on hammering home on eligibility as being an issue, because then we have to resort to things like that, which necessarily should not be what we have to push for. So, and I just want to let you know that bilateral finance is actually not from a developed country. It's actually from a developing country, weirdly enough. It's from the UAE through the IRENA Abu Dhabi Fund for Development. So and it's for mitigation as well. It's a loan. So yeah, it's just good to kind of unpack again what the different trends we're seeing as it relates to our climate finance spend. So next slide, please. Right. So again, this is another graph looking at our international climate finance flows. And you can see again, surprise again, what year was the main year that we kind of had the uptake. Weirdly enough, this is correlation because it's delayed. So if and this is on disbursement. So by some sort of, I guess, cosmic shift, a lot of it kind of came in 2017. But a lot of, when you try to program international climate finance, it takes you, as you know, 2 to 3 years to develop projects, and even first disbursements take 1 year. But as well, another correlation is that we weren't accredited as yet to the Adaptation Fund until that year, and I think the GCF was the year after. So next slide.
Sorry, Mikai, can I just ask you to wrap it up so we have some time for the Q&A?
That's just our mapping of the private sector. Next slide. No, next slide, yeah. Okay. That's it.
Thank you.
All right.
Well, can we just give a round of applause to all of our panelists today for those rich insights into their experiences and priorities. We have, we're fast running out of time, but we might squeeze in 10 minutes for a Q&A. If anyone has a question, can you raise your hand? And does this work? Can we try and, yeah, we'll get the microphone to you. I see 2 questions, one up the back and then one here. We might, and 3. So we might take the 3 and then ask the panelists to respond. Thank you. Sure, and if you could please introduce yourself and if your question is directed to the panel or a particular panelist. Thank you.
My name is Mawi Shaddad. I'm from Sudan, and I'm just would like, because I heard some good presentation, but I don't feel this satisfies the NBF, the need-based funds finance, because you know, if you look at it, the whole focus, they say, the whole agreed adaptation for the regions, the various regions, is the most important. But when you look at it, most of it went into mitigation, and most of it we heard about loans, I heard about banks. Was that the purpose of the UNFCCC NBF? That's what's worried me about the presentations. I thought, you know, and the amount of money claimed they would like to see until 2030, you know, compared to what actually been received, is also a very worrying issue. Thank you. I stop here.
Thank you very much. That sounded like more of a statement rather than a question, but I'll ask the panel members to keep that in mind, and perhaps you can weave in a reflection or a response to that. Next question, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is John. I'm with the International Humanitarian and Development NGO CARE. Thanks for very interesting presentations. I've got like 3 questions. First of all, one is about international climate finance flows. A number of you had some numbers on these, and I wonder if you somehow compared the numbers you got on international climate flows with the reporting by the developed countries on the same flows, and if you saw any kind of differences between what the donors sort of reported and what you thought that came to your countries. Second question is that climate finance can mean a lot of different things, and therefore I would be very interested in knowing if you were using very concise definitions of climate finance, and if you think that those definitions should be used in these negotiations further on. And then final question is about loss and damage finance. I noticed that Michael, you mentioned a number about the needs for loss and damage finance, and some of you also touched about loss and damage finance. But I wonder what kind of methodologies you use to sort of assess the needs for loss and damage finance.
Thank you very much, John. And we might just take one more question. Sorry, yep, Chao and then Gabriella, and then that's it. Okay.
Hi, this is Chao from China. I missed the presentation of the Arab region. I just wondered how much climate finance is needed in the Arab region. Thank you.
Thanks, Chao. Sorry, I think we might just take Gabriella's question and then pause there, because I am aware that we need to vacate the room, and there was quite a few questions that I might get the panel to respond to. I think most of us will be around at the end, so you're more than welcome to approach one of the panelists if you have a burning question. So Gabriella, and then I'll get the panel to respond.
Thank you. Gabriella, I work at the Ministry of Environment in Switzerland and work as among many things, also as a climate finance negotiator. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation. I have, and you can also respond to these afterwards, because I have questions to the various panelists quite specifically. To Eileen, thanks very much. It was very interesting. What are the areas of the strategy for resource mobilization that you're targeting in your strategy? And has the regional approach helped you to work through these elements that you're addressing, that you feel that is beneficial to work as a region? Then to Albert, also very interesting, especially that you identified that the fact that it's banking finance is one of the main challenges. Do you feel things like green credit lines for the ASEAN region would help you to overcome these challenges, or whether global guidance for enhanced green sustainable banking would help you to knowing how your finance landscape looks like? Then Mekai, very interesting, and I recall the conversations we had and see again where it comes from. Are you continuing to map the needs and the spending along the definition you have come up in the context of this project? And how does it help you also in like domestic spending programming and things like that? And then lastly, not least, to Ahmed, also very interesting to hear your perspective in the Arab region. How does the Arab League or I mean, you have different countries in your region with different levels of capacities. How do the countries with higher capacities assist those with least capacities? You were mentioning LDCs, for example, to address these, to identify needs and to address these needs, knowing that you know your region best, and maybe you can assist your colleagues in the region best in identifying the needs, knowing the context better than, for example, if we would do that. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gabriella. And I think we might try and attempt to answer some of those questions. So we had the reflection from the gentleman from Sudan as to the adaptation and mitigation split, as well as the loan issue. We had John asking the question around the difference between what a recipient might report versus what a donor might report, and if you see any discrepancies there. Also on climate finance definition and loss and damage financing. We had Charles' question up the back on the needs for the region, and Gabriella's a suite of questions. So we are also almost out of time. So perhaps what I might do is I might just go through the panel and one by one just take maximum of 1 minute each to respond to your question of choice. Okay, please.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I will be really quick answering some of the very important, relevant questions to our region, and I will leave the other questions for other colleagues. With regards to the needs of our region, as I recall, it is estimated the total quantified numbers between 436 billion to 478 billion cumulative towards 2030. But also, it is really interesting to note that the financial flows is really estimated to be around 5.1 to 7.6 billion US dollars, of course, in the per year. We can see clearly the gap here, and this is basically answering the first question, I think. With regards to the climate finance definitions, of course, this is an ongoing discussion we have under the Standing Committee on Finance. I can see some of colleagues here. And we are really, this is actually one of the mandate was given from Glasgow to the Standing Committee on Finance to come up with to undertaking this work. And we hope that we can see climate finance definition that's inclusive, holistic in its approach, that maintain and secure the already obligations that is giving to the developed countries to finance developing countries. That might answer also another question from Gabriele with regards to Arab region as well. All of our regions are developing countries, vulnerable to impact the climate change. I think all of them developing countries, and some of them least developed countries. So with that, I think I'm good. Thank you so much.
Sure. Please, over to you, Michael.
Yeah,
1 minute, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm not a very fast talker, but I'll try. Yeah. So maybe quick on the issue of finance received from international sources. Basically, in our systems, we basically were able to track those through public sources, through government, channels, and we were not in the tracking. We have not yet put in place systems for tracking the non-government channels like civil society or private sector and so on. What else? Maybe a quick one on what Gabriela talked about on the issue of regional approach. It is true that I think regional approach helps to come up with maybe what I could call framework kind of programs that can be able to address issues that cut across in the regions, and experts within the region can be able to also share experience and exchange ideas here and there to help build resilience across the region. Sorry, I may have taken more than what you.
Thanks so much, Michael. Eileen?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll answer the specific question from Gabby to me. So under the strategy, we are trying to develop multi-sector project pipelines for adaptation, and we are also going to explore the potential for aggregation of projects from our respective country pipelines. And some of the areas that we have identified so far for collaboration include coral reef adaptation, early warning systems covering the region, infrastructure resilience, and food security. On your second question on whether the approach is helpful, yes, it is very helpful for us because as island states, we are one of the least integrated regions in the world. So the UNFCCC support was very helpful in bringing us all together, and I think we have a lot of potential to pool in our collective capacities to develop a strong regional program. Yeah, and also since no formal entity exists in the region, we are also with UNFCCC support now trying to come up with an MOU on climate finance access collaboration. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eileen. Albert?
Thank you so much for the questions, but I would like to address the concern, Gabriela's concern about green finance. If I understand, I mean the question is all about green financing as well as how to have a national, how to sustain this. The scheme. As I mentioned in my presentation, one of the achievements of the NBF project was because we were able to finalize the second phase of the project, which would focus on the development of the climate finance access strategy, and the strategy would include the need to have technical assistance on developing a national green financing roadmap, and also included is supporting regulatory tools and mechanism. We also recognize the provision of green finance facilities for my MSMEs is very critical in the delivery of climate finance at the community level. So we would like also to work on with communities on this. Thanks so much, Gabriela.
Thank you so much.
Very quickly from my side, I just wanted to react on the comment made by our colleague from Sudan. Through this exercise, we've noticed, and I agree with him, we've noticed that there is a big difference between the needs that have been assessed and the current flows. So in terms of mobilization of climate financing, is a critical issue in West Africa. And we've noticed also that most of countries that are facing also challenges in accessing to financing like GCF funds because of this complexity of the rules and the long process of mobilizing funding resources. So this is something that is really critical for our country, and we should find more innovative ways to mobilize funding for climate actions. And the loss and damage finance, not solved yet. We are still discussing it, and I think it's an issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, Gabby, just to answer you, yes, we're continuing. So but we're using the funding from the GCF Readiness 4 and the GCF Readiness 5 to continue with the methodologies. Also, I don't know if other countries have chart of accounts, basically, that they use to do their budgetary sort of coding. We have now included specific climate relevant coding into our chart of accounts. So we've been working very closely with our Ministry of Finance. loss and damage finance methodologies. So in our assessment, we kind of unpacked possible loss and damage relevant capital and recurrent expenditures. So we really and truly only had time to look at it from the government perspective. However, noting that there's a lot of loss and damage spending by the private sector, and especially that panic buying, it's primarily being done by the private sector, but something as well we unpacked in the assessment. And also on the good question on what is internationally provided versus what's internationally received, we did see issues between, for example, what a fund said that they would commit, and they do say that they're committing X amount of funds or have dispersed X amount of funds, but what we receive in disbursements is normally very, very delayed, and that is an access issue as well, right? So we do have to look at the methodologies from that perspective. And again, I can't speak to bilateral because we don't get bilateral, so this is primarily in relation to a lot of the funds, but I'm sure it might be easier for other bilateral funds. But yeah, speculation. Thanks. I hope that was good, Fiona.
Thanks so much, Mikai. And I know that there were several colleagues here who had questions that we didn't get to. So we have run out of time, but what I would suggest is that I think we have to move out of the room, but I would encourage you to approach one of the panelists if you did have a follow-up question. I might just try, I mean, obviously we won't be able to sum up everything, but I might just try in under 1 minute to sum up what we have heard today. And that there is a significant gap between finance mobilised and provided throughout all the regions that we heard from. There is still an imbalance between adaptation and mitigation, particularly for the most vulnerable. There are calls for more support on areas such as capacity building and institutional building. More regional work is planned, such as concepts and conduct outreach, as well as investment forums. Disaster, including loss and damage, budget spending, where climate relevant is increasing. The project is supporting climate finance access and mobilisation on the ground. And lastly, that the project has received positive feedback and other countries and regions are also interested in being supported. It's great to see so much interest in this project, as reflected not only in the amount of questions that we had, but also in the turnout today. I would like to ask everyone now to join me in thanking all of our panellists and opening speakers for their time today. And thank you very much for coming. Cheers.